The sky above New Eden burned orange as three alien ships descended through the clouds like giant metal insects hungry for prey. Mara Vance stood at the kitchen window of her small farmhouse and watched the ships come down with a cold feeling growing in her chest. A feeling she had not felt in many years. A feeling she had tried to bury forever. Her husband. Thomas ran in from the fields with fear on his face and shouted for her to take Elias and hide in the cellar beneath the barn. Elias was only 5 years old, with pale yellow hair and eyes the color of the summer sky, and he did not understand why his father looked so scared or why his mother suddenly moved with such strange and careful purpose. Mara grabbed her son and held him tight against her chest as she ran toward the barn, but she knew in her heart that the cellar would not save them, because she had seen ships like these before in another life. She had tried to forget the Vethkai were six-limbed creatures that stood twice as tall as any human, with hard shells, the color of dried blood, and eyes like black glass that showed no warmth or mercy. They came to New Eden because their scouts had found this small human colony on the edge of explored space, and they wanted to test how easily humans could be broken and conquered. The first plasma blast hit the center of the colony and turned the community hall into a crater of melted stone and burning wood. Mara heard the screams of her neighbors dying, and she pressed her hand over her son's ears so he would not hear the terrible sounds of people she loved being murdered. She reached the barn and pulled open the hidden door to the cellar and pushed Elias down into the darkness below. "Stay here, my brave boy," she whispered to him. "Stay quiet like a little mouse and do not come out until Mama comes for you. Do you understand?" Elias nodded with tears in his eyes, but he did not cry out loud, because even at 5 years old, he could see something in his mother's face that told him this was not a time for tears. Mara closed the cellar door and covered it with hay, and then she ran back toward the farmhouse because Thomas was still out there, and she could not leave him alone. But she was too late. She found her husband lying in the dirt near the front porch with a hole burned through his chest and his eyes staring up at nothing. Mara felt something break inside her heart, but she did not scream and she did not fall to her knees, because there was no time for grief when her son was still alive and still in danger. She heard the heavy footsteps of the Vethkai soldiers approaching, and she grabbed Thomas's hunting rifle from the porch and ran into the farmhouse to hide through the window. She watched as a group of 7 Vethkai warriors marched past her home with weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Their leader was taller than the others, with golden markings on his shell that showed his high rank among his people. This was Broodmaster Sithrak, and he walked through the burning colony with the pride of a conqueror who had never known defeat. Sithrak raised one of his clawed hands and ordered his soldiers to search every building for survivors, because he wanted prisoners to take back as trophies of this easy victory. Mara's blood turned cold as she watched 2 soldiers head toward the barn where her son was hiding. She burst out of the farmhouse with the rifle raised and fired 3 shots at the soldiers before they could react. 1 shot hit a soldier in the joint between his neck and shoulder, and he fell with a screech of pain and surprise. The other soldiers turned toward her with murder in their black eyes, and Mara knew she had only seconds to live, but she had bought time for Elias, and that was all that mattered. A plasma blast hit the farmhouse behind her, and the explosion threw her forward into the dirt as fire and wood rained down around her. Heat was terrible, and Mara felt her skin burning as debris buried her beneath the ruins of the home where she had hoped to raise her son in peace. She could not move, and darkness crept into the edges of her vision as her body screamed with pain. The last thing she heard before everything went black was Broodmaster Sithrak's clicking voice ordering his soldiers to check the barn. Sithrak himself walked to the destroyed farmhouse and looked down at the burning wreckage with cold satisfaction. One human female had dared to fight back, and now she was dead like all the others who had tried to resist the might of the Vethkai Empire. He turned away without a second thought because she was nothing but a weak creature from a weak species. His soldiers returned from the barn, carrying something small and squirming. In their claws, it was a human child with yellow hair and blue eyes who stared at the alien warriors without screaming or crying. Ithrak tilted his head with interest as he looked at this tiny creature. Most young ones of the species they conquered would scream and weep and beg, but this one simply watched with eyes that seemed to see everything. Bring him to me, Sithrak commanded. The soldiers dropped Elias at their master's feet, and the boy stood up on shaking legs, but still did not cry. You are a strange little thing, Sithrak said through his translation device. Your kind die so easily, but you do not seem afraid. Elias looked up at the towering alien and spoke in a small but steady voice. My mama will come for me. Sithrak made a sound that might have been laughter. Your mother is dead, little creature. I watched her burn. She is nothing but ash now. Elias shook his head slowly. No, he said. She will come. Sithrak found this amusing and decided that this small human would make an interesting trophy to show the Hive Council. He ordered his soldiers to put the child in a containment field and prepare to leave this boring little world behind. The Vethkai ships rose into the sky carrying their stolen prize and left behind nothing but fire and death and silence. But beneath the ruins of the farmhouse, something moved. A hand pushed through the blackened wood and burning debris. The hand was burned and bleeding, but it was alive. Mara Lance pulled herself out of the wreckage with pain that would have killed most people, but she had survived worse. In the dark years before she became a farmer and a mother, she stood on broken legs and watched the alien ships disappear into the clouds above her. Home was gone and her husband was dead, and her son had been taken from her. Mara did not scream, and she did not weep. She simply watched the sky with eyes that held no tears, but burned with something far more dangerous than fire. Then she began to walk toward the colony's emergency beacon, one slow and painful step at a time. The creature that loved her, Sun, was awake now, and nothing in the galaxy would stop her from getting him back. Mara reached the colonial garrison 3 hours after the attack, with blood dripping from wounds that should have killed her and bones grinding together. With every step she took, the garrison was destroyed just like everything else on New Eden, and the bodies of the soldiers who were supposed to protect the colony lay scattered across the ground like broken toys. She walked past them without stopping because the dead could not help her, and she had no time to mourn. Near the armory entrance, she found what she was looking for. A Vethkai scout lay against the wall with green blood pooling beneath his cracked shell and his breathing coming in short, wet gasps. The other raiders had left him behind because he was dying, and the Vethkai did not waste resources on the weak. Mara knelt down in front of him and grabbed one of his antennae and twisted it until he screamed. Where did they take the child? She asked in a voice as cold as deep space. The scout clicked his mandibles and tried to spit at her, but she twisted harder and he screamed again. The choir. He finally gasped. They take all prizes to the choir, a station 3 systems away in the Vethkai border territory. What are the coordinates? Mara demanded. The scout laughed weakly and said she was foolish if she thought she could reach the choir alone, because it was a fortress protected by a fleet and thousands of warriors. Mara did not ask again. She simply reached into the scout's belt pouch and pulled out his navigation device and checked that the coordinates were stored in its memory. Then she stood up and walked away while the scout cursed at her in his clicking language. She did not look back when his cursing stopped, and silence told her he was finally dead inside the ruined armory. Mara found weapons that had survived the attack, and she began to gather what she needed: plasma rifles and explosive charges, and a combat suit that would protect her from the vacuum of space. She worked quickly with hands that remembered this kind of work even after years of trying to forget. As she armed herself, she thought about the woman she used to be before she met Thomas and before Elias was born. Her name had been different then, and she had served in Earth's unification wars, a conflict so terrible and so bloody that the government erased it from history when it was over. She had been part of a unit called the Echoes, soldiers trained to do the things that regular armies could not do. Soldiers who were sent into the darkness to end wars by any means necessary. The things she had done in those years haunted her dreams, even now, but she had walked away from that life and promised herself she would never go back. She had buried the creature she used to be and built a new life with a kind man who loved her and a beautiful son who made her believe she could be good. But the Vethkai had taken that life from her when they burned her home and murdered her husband and stole her child, and now the creature was awake. Again, Mara found a damaged courier ship in the garrison hangar that still had power and could still fly. She loaded her weapons aboard and sat in the pilot's seat and activated the ship's computer. A password screen appeared and asked for her military authorization code. She typed in a string of numbers she had never forgotten no matter how hard she tried, and the screen turned green. Welcome back, Operative Vance. The computer said, Echo Protocol files are now accessible. Mara opened the files and began to read through the tactical data she had once used to destroy entire enemy installations. There were files on xenobiology that explained how to exploit the weaknesses of alien species. There were files on psychological warfare that taught how to break an enemy's will without firing a single shot. And there were files marked extinction level response only that contained methods so terrible they made even hardened soldiers sick to read them. Mara downloaded everything to her personal device and prepared the ship for launch. As the engines powered up, she thought about her son sitting alone in an alien prison surrounded by creatures who saw him as nothing more than a trophy. She thought about the fear he must be feeling and the confusion in his young mind as he waited for his mother to come save him, and she thought about Broodmaster Sithrak, who had stood over her burning body and laughed. A cold smile crossed her face as she guided the ship up through the atmosphere and into the black void of space. Vethkai thought they understood war because they had conquered dozens of species across hundreds of worlds. They thought humans were soft and weak because they lived in small colonies and farmed the land and raised their children in peace. They had no idea what humans were capable of when someone took the thing they loved most in all the universe. As the ship jumped into faster than light travel, Mara began to plan her approach to the choir. She would not attack with guns blazing like a fool because that would get her killed before she reached her son. Instead, she would be patient and careful and utterly ruthless. She would study the enemy and learn their weaknesses, and then she would use those weaknesses to tear them apart from the inside. The journey would take several days, and she used that time to heal her wounds and memorize every piece of intelligence she had gathered. She watched recordings of Vethkai behavior and learned how they thought and what they feared. She discovered that the Vethkai had evolved from prey animals millions of years ago and still carried deep instinctive fears of predators in their genetic memory. This information made her smile again because fear was a weapon she knew how to use very well. On the second day of travel, she intercepted a Vethkai communication that made her blood run hot with rage. It was a broadcast announcing that Broodmaster Sithrak would present his human trophy to the Hive Council as proof of the successful expansion into human territory. They were going to parade her son in front of their leaders like a prize animal. Mara closed her eyes and took a slow breath and pushed the rage down deep where it could fuel her instead of blind her patience. She told herself, patience and precision. When she opened her eyes again, they were empty of everything except cold determination. She entered the coordinates for a refueling station on the edge of Vethkai space and prepared to make her first stop. The station was run by the Vethkai and staffed by their soldiers, and she would need fuel to continue her journey. But she would also need to send a message that would tell the Vethkai something was coming for them, something that would not stop until it had taken back what they stole. As the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel and the refueling station appeared on her screen. Mara began to hum a soft melody. It was a lullaby she had sung to Elias every night since he was born. A simple song about stars and dreams and a mother's love that would last forever. She hummed it now as she armed her weapons and prepared to dock with the station. "Hold on, my brave boy," she whispered to the empty ship. "Mama is coming," and the galaxy would learn to fear the sound of her song. The great chamber of the Hive Council gleamed with bioluminescent light as the highest. Leaders of the Vethkai Empire gathered to witness Broodmaster Sithrak's presentation. 12 council members sat on raised platforms around the room. There, ancient shells marked with the golden patterns of nobility, and their black eyes watching everything with cold intelligence. Shaka stood in the center of the chamber, with pride swelling in his chest as he prepared to show them his prize from the human colony. Bring forth the creature. He commanded 2 guards carried a containment field into the chamber, and inside the field stood little Elias with his yellow hair and his blue eyes that showed no fear. The Tole council members leaned forward with interest as they examined this small being from a species they barely knew. It is so tiny. One of them clicked. "Are all humans this fragile?" "This one is young," Sithrak explained. "They grow larger but remain soft and weak. Their skin tears easily, and their bones break like dried sticks." The council made sounds of amusement at this description. Shakrak continued to speak about the raid on New Eden and how easily his warriors had slaughtered the human colonists. Told them that humans were perfect targets for expansion because they spread across space in small, vulnerable settlements with little military protection. The Vethkai Empire would grow fat on human worlds, he declared, and their people would serve as slaves and trophies for generations to come. The council members clicked their approval at this vision of conquest, but then one of them noticed something strange about the human child. The little creature was not cowering or weeping like the young of other conquered species. Instead, he stood straight and still and watched the council with eyes that seemed almost peaceful. "Why does it not fear us?" the council member asked. Sithrak made a dismissive gesture with his claws. "It is too stupid to understand its situation," he said. "Or perhaps too young to know it should be afraid." But Elias spoke then in a clear small voice that echoed through the chamber. "I am not afraid," he said, "because my mama is coming to get me." The council members made sounds of laughter at this innocent statement. Sithrak laughed loudest of all and told the child once again that his mother was dead and that no one would ever come to save him. Elias simply shook his head and smiled a tiny smile that made some of the council members feel strangely uncomfortable. Far across Vethkai space, at a refueling station called Station 17, the commander received an emergency alert from his security team. A human ship had docked at the station requesting fuel and supplies. The commander was annoyed because humans rarely traveled this deep into Vethkai territory, and their presence here was suspicious. He ordered his soldiers to board the human ship and detain its pilot for questioning. But when the soldiers entered the ship, they found it empty. Commander was confused and ordered a search of the entire station. 3 hours later, the search teams had not reported back. The commander sent more soldiers to find them, and those soldiers also disappeared into silence. Fear began to creep into the commander's hearts as he realized something was hunting his people inside his own station. The creep into the commander's hearts as he realized something was hunting his people inside his own station. Tried to send a distress signal to the nearest patrol fleet, but the communication systems had been disabled. He tried to seal the station and trap whatever was inside, but the door controls had been destroyed, and then the lights began to go out one section at a time. That the door controls had been destroyed, and then the lights began to go out one section at a time. That the door controlled the station and trap whatever was inside, but the door can destroyed, and then decisions in the lights began to go out one section at a time. Commander gathered his remaining soldiers in the command center and ordered them to form a defensive circle with weapons raised. They waited in the darkness, listening to the sound of their own breathing and the distant echo of footsteps moving through the corridors. Then, they heard something else, a soft sound that none of them recognized, a human voice humming a gentle melody that drifted through the vents like smoke. The soldiers began to shake as the humming grew closer and closer. The commander never saw what killed him. 3 days later, a Vethkai patrol fleet discovered Station 17 drifting and dark with no response to their signals. When they boarded the station, they found every single Vethkai inside dead. Not killed quickly with blaster fire, but taken apart slowly and carefully, as if someone had wanted to study how they were made. The patrol commander reported this horror to his superiors, and the report traveled up the chain of command until it reached the Hive Council itself. But this was only the first report. Over the next week, 7 more incidents were recorded across Vethkai space. A supply convoy found destroyed with its cargo untouched and its crew vanished. A patrol vessel discovered drifting with its crew dead and strange human symbols painted on the walls in green. Vethkai blood, a military outpost that went silent and was found with its soldiers killed and its weapons stolen. Each incident was separated by vast distances that should have made them impossible for a single attacker to reach, and yet witnesses from nearby ships all reported the same thing: a small human vessel appearing from nowhere, striking without warning, and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The Vethkai began calling it the ghost ship, and stories spread through the fleet of a demon that hunted them in the darkness between stars. The Hive Council demanded answers, but their intelligence officers had none to give. All they knew was that someone was coming, and nothing seemed able to stop them. Broodmaster Sithrak dismissed the reports as exaggeration and coincidence. The humans were weak creatures, he insisted, and one human ship could not possibly cause this much damage to the mighty Vethkai Empire. But then a transmission arrived at the council chamber addressed directly to Sithrak himself. The bust council members gathered to watch as Sithrak opened the transmission, expecting a surrender or a plea for mercy. Instead, there was only silence, and then a sound began to play through the chamber. Speakers, a human voice humming a soft and gentle melody. Lullaby. Sithrak felt something cold move through his body as he listened to that simple song. The council members looked at each other with the first flickers of real fear in their ancient eyes. Where did this transmission come from? Sithrak demanded. His communications officer checked the source with trembling claws. The signal originated from inside their own defense perimeter, somewhere in the space around the choir station itself. Sithrak stared at the screen as the lullaby continued to play, and for the first time since he conquered New Eden, he felt uncertain in the containment field. Elias heard the humming too, and his small face lit up with joy. "I told you," he said softly. "Mama is coming." And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Mara Vance smiled as she watched the choir grow larger on her view screen. She had sent her message, and now the Vethkai knew she was here. Let them be afraid, she thought. Let them taste the fear that my son has felt every day since they stole him from me. The hunt was almost over, and the real nightmare was about to begin. The choir was a massive station that hung in space like a metal mountain with thousands of lights glittering across its surface, and dozens of warships patrolling around it in endless circles. Inside lived over 50,000 Vethkai soldiers, workers, and nobles, along with 10,000 slaves from a dozen conquered species who served their masters without hope of freedom. Broodmaster Sithrak had tripled the patrols and ordered entrance sealed after receiving the mysterious transmission. No ship would dock without being searched, and no person would move through the corridors without identification. He was certain that no single human could breach his fortress, no matter how skilled or determined she might be. But Sithrak did not understand what he was dealing with. He thought he was fighting a soldier, But he was wrong. He was fighting a Mother Mara. Did not try to sneak through the patrols or fight her way through the defenses instead. She floated in the shadow of a cargo transport and attached herself to its hull like a spider waiting for prey. When the transport docked for inspection, she slipped through a maintenance hatch so small that the Vethkai guards never even thought to check it. Now she was inside the choir and the clock was ticking. She moved through ventilation shafts and service tunnels that her stolen intelligence files told her existed. She avoided guards and cameras and security checkpoints with patience learned through years of doing the impossible, but infiltration was only the first part of her plan. The second part would bring the choir to its knees. Mara had studied the Vethkai biology files during her journey and discovered something wonderful. The Vethkai had evolved from small creatures that were hunted by massive predators on their homeworld. Those predators had been extinct for millions of years, but the Vethkai still carried the fear of them deep in their genetic code, and that fear could be triggered by a specific chemical compound, a pheromone, that mimicked the scent of the ancient predators. Mara had synthesized this compound from materials she gathered during her attacks on Vethkai ships and stations. Now she carried a dozen small canisters of it attached to her belt. She crawled through the ventilation system until she reached the main air recycling center that pumped fresh atmosphere to every section of the station too. Workers sat at control panels monitoring the systems, but they never saw her drop from the ceiling behind them. She killed them quickly and quietly, and then connected her canisters to the main air supply. The pheromone would spread through the entire station within an hour, and then the Vethkai would learn what true fear felt like. While she waited, Mara accessed a terminal and located the containment cells where prisoners and trophies were kept. Elias was being held in the command spire at the center of the station under heavy guard. She also found something else in the station's database, a list of all the enslaved species currently held aboard the choir and the locations of their holding areas. An idea formed in her mind as she studied the information. The slaves outnumbered the Vethkai nearly 5-1, but they were kept controlled through fear and force. What if that control was broken? What if the slaves suddenly found themselves with weapons and the knowledge that their masters were helpless with terror? Mara smiled and began to work, sending encrypted messages to communication devices. In every slave holding area, the messages were simple and direct. Your masters will soon be paralyzed with fear. She told them, weapons caches are located at these coordinates. Fight for your freedom or die as slaves. The choice is yours. Then she sat back and waited for the pheromone to do its work. The first screams began 40 minutes later. In the recreation halls, Vethkai soldiers suddenly dropped their weapons and began to shake as primal terror flooded their minds. In the command center's officers abandoned their posts and ran in circles, looking for threats that existed only in their genetic nightmares. In the corridors, workers crawled on the floor and clicked desperately for help as visions of ancient predators filled their eyes. The choir descended into chaos as 50,000 Vethkai experienced fear for the first time in their evolution, and into that chaos rose the slaves. They found the weapon caches exactly where Mara had told them, and they armed themselves with the tools of their oppression species that had been beaten and broken for generations. Suddenly remembered what it felt like to fight back. The killing began in the lower levels and spread upward like fire through dry grass. Mara moved through the pandemonium like a ghost. Vethkai soldiers saw her coming, but they were too paralyzed with fear to raise their weapons. She killed them with mercy. Quick deaths that ended their suffering. But she was not merciful to the officers and nobles she found hiding in their quarters. Those she made sure understood exactly why they were dying. For every child you stole, she whispered to a weeping commander. For every family you destroyed, the command spire was defended by Sithrak's personal guard, elite warriors who had been given chemical blockers to resist the pheromone. There were 30 of them standing between Mara and her son. She killed them all. In 7 minutes, she used the narrow corridors to prevent them from surrounding her and turned their numbers into a disadvantage. She used flashbang grenades to blind them and smoke to confuse them. She used their own fear of the chaos below to make them hesitate at critical moments, and she used skills that had been honed in wars that history had tried to forget. When the last guard fell, she stood before the door to the containment chamber, covered in green blood and breathing hard. The door slid open and she stepped inside. Broodmaster Sithrak stood in the center of the room with Elias held in front of him like a shield. The Vethkai leader was shaking, and his black eyes were wide with a terror that had nothing to do with pheromones. "What are you?" He clicked through his translator. "What kind of creature are you?" Mara looked past him to her son, who was smiling despite the claws wrapped around his small body. Elias showed no fear at all because he had never doubted for a moment that his mother would come. Mara looked back at Sithrak, and her voice was calm and cold as she answered his question. "I am his mother." Sithrak's mandibles clicked frantically as he tried to bargain. "Take him," he pleaded. "Take the child and leave. I will give you a ship and safe passage. Just spare my life." Mara shook her head slowly. "You burned my home," she said. "You killed my husband. You took my son and called him a trophy." Sithrak saw no mercy in her eyes, and he knew his death was standing in front of him. But before Mara could move, the doors behind her burst open. A flood of freed slaves poured into the chamber with weapons raised and rage burning in their eyes. They had fought their way up through the station, killing every Vethkai they found, and now they had found the Broodmaster himself. Mara stepped aside as the slaves surrounded Sithrak and ripped him away from Elias. She scooped her son into her arms and held him tight as the slaves took their revenge on the creature who had caused so much sufferings. Ithrak's screams echoed through the chamber, but Mara did not watch. She was already walking toward the escape shuttles with her son's arms wrapped around her neck. "Mama," Elias whispered, "I knew you would come. I will always come for you." She whispered back, always behind them. The choir continued to burn as centuries of oppression came to a bloody end. Mara hummed a gentle lullaby as she carried her son to safety through the chaos she had created. The escape shuttle broke away from the choir as explosions rippled across the station's surface and debris scattered into the void like glittering dust. Mara guided the small craft through the chaos, while Elias sat strapped into the seat beside her with wonder in his eyes. Behind them, hundreds of other shuttles and lifeboats fled the dying station, carrying freed slaves from a dozen different worlds. The Vethkai patrol ships tried to respond, but their crews were still struggling with the effects of the pheromone, and their commanders were dead or hiding by the time they organized a pursuit. The escaped slaves had scattered in every direction, carrying stories of what had happened aboard the choir. Mara set a course for human space and engaged the faster-than-light drive. Stars stretched into lines of light, and then the shuttle jumped away from Vethkai territory forever. Elias watched the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel through the viewport with his small hand holding tightly to his mother's fingers. "Mama," he asked softly, "are we going home now?" Mara felt her heart ache at the question, because the home they had known was gone forever. "Our old home is gone, sweetheart," she told him gently, "but we will find a new home where we can be safe and happy." Elias nodded and leaned his head against her arm. "Will the monsters come back?" he asked. Mara looked down at her son and saw the innocence that still lived in his eyes despite everything he had been through. "No," she promised him. "The monsters will never bother us again." She meant every word. The journey back to human space took 5 days, and Mara used that time to rest and heal and hold her son close. She sang him lullabies and told him stories, and slowly began to rebuild the bond that the Vethkai had tried to break. Elias did not ask about his father, and Mara did not know if he understood that Thomas was gone. She would tell him when he was ready, but for now she just wanted to give him peace. When they finally reached a human colony world called Haven's Rest, the authorities greeted them with confusion and suspicion. A Woman and a child arriving alone in a stolen HFY shuttle was not something they saw every day, but when Mara explained what had happened to New Eden, the confusion turned to horror, and then to action. Relief ships were sent to the remains of the colony to search for survivors and recover the dead. Military commanders demanded to know everything about the HFY attack, and their defenses politicians called for immediate retaliation against this new alien threat, but Mara refused to speak to any of them. She had done enough killing, and she wanted no part of any war that might come. She took Elias to a small settlement on the edge of Haven's Rest, where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business there. She rented a small house with a garden and began to build a new life for her and her son. She planted vegetables and flowers just like she had on New Eden, and she watched Elias play in the sunshine with other children from the settlement. Sometimes at night she would dream of the things she had done aboard the choir and wake up with screams caught in her throat, but then she would check on Elias sleeping peacefully in his bed, and the nightmares would fade away. He was safe, and that was all that mattered. Far away in HFY space, the Hive Council convened an emergency session to address the catastrophe that had befallen their empire. Choir was destroyed, and with it 40,000 HFY soldiers and workers. Broodmaster Sithric was dead, torn apart by the slaves he had once commanded. The freed slaves had escaped to dozens of different worlds, spreading tales of HFY weakness and human vengeance, and worst of all, the Empire's intelligence. Networks have finally pieced together the truth about what had happened. A single human female had infiltrated their most secure station, turned their own biology against them, armed their slaves, and escaped with her child. One human had done all of this. The council demanded a full report on human military capabilities, and what they received made them fall silent with dread. The human who destroyed the choir was classified as a civilian in human records. She had been retired from military service for over a decade. The wars she had fought in were so secret that even human governments pretended they never happened, and according to human population data, there were millions of humans with similar training scattered across hundreds of colony worlds. Millions of creatures like the one that had just brought down the choir. The council looked at each other and saw their own fear reflected back. One voice spoke up and asked what would happen if humans decided to seek revenge for the attack on New Eden. Another voice pointed out that human colonies were full of families with children, just like the one Sithric had stolen, families protected by parents who would burn the galaxy down to save them. The vote was unanimous. Human space was to be declared forbidden territory effective immediately. No HFY ship was to enter human-controlled systems for any reason. No raids, no scouts, no contact of any kind. The humans were to be left alone forever. The decree spread through the HFY Empire within days, and every warrior and commander received the same warning. Do not touch the humans. Do not threaten them. Do not take from them. Do not even look at them with hostile intent, because if you do, then something will come for you in the darkness. Something that loves what you have taken, and nothing in the galaxy will save you from its wrath. 6 months after the fall of the choir, Mara sat on the porch of her little house and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elias ran toward her from the garden with flowers in his hands and a smile on his face that made her heart feel whole again. Look, Mama, he shouted happily. I picked these for you. Mara took the flowers and pulled her son into her lap and held him tight. They are beautiful, sweetheart, she said. Just like you. Elias giggled and snuggled against her chest as the last light of day faded into twilight. After a while, he looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Mama, he asked, are there really monsters out there in space? Mara followed his gaze and thought about the HFY hiding in their territory, terrified of a species they had thought was weak. Yes, she told him softly. There are monsters out there. Elias frowned with worry. What if they come here? Mara kissed the top of his head and smiled. Then they will learn what happens when they threaten our family. She said, they will learn that humans protect what we love. Elias nodded and seemed satisfied with this answer. He yawned and closed his eyes, and within minutes, he was asleep in his mother's arms. Mara carried him inside and tucked him into bed and pulled the blanket up to his chin sleep, while my brave boy. She whispered then. She walked back to the porch and sat down in the darkness. She looked up at the stars and began to hum a soft lullaby, the same lullaby she had sung to Elias every night of his life, the same lullaby that had echoed through the choir. As it fell, the same lullaby that now served as a warning to every species in the galaxy, a warning that somewhere out there among the stars lived creatures who looked soft and weak creatures, who built farms and raised children and sang gentle songs. But if you threatened what they loved, if you took their children or burned their homes, then the soft creatures would show you what they truly were. They would show you the monsters that loved. Then the galaxy would never forget the sound of a mother's song. Mara hummed into the night, and the stars seemed to listen, and somewhere in the darkness the Vethkai trembled.